everybody, and welcome back to the T.H.O. Movie Reviews podcast, the show where we bring you passionate, honest, and insightful film criticism. I'm your host, Bennett Campbell Ferguson, here today to analyze a, shall we say, very interesting Oscars ceremony last night. We're recording the day after. And to help me do that, I've got a couple of my wonderful colleagues, starting the man who longs for the days when Best Pictures could win more than 3 Oscars. It's Geoff Wallace.
Woo! Yeah.
How you doing, Geoff?
Doing well. Yeah.
And also here we have a guy who I'm pretty sure is psyched by Sound of Metal's 2 wins. It's Jim Newman.
You know
Jim,
that?
how are you?
I'm amazed that you would even say that because you're absolutely correct, and I don't understand how you would know that. We'll have to analyze. You got to analyze me because somehow you know something about me that I'm not aware is generally available information, because I did love, for the record, the Sound of Music, the Sound of Metal.
I think I remembered it because you said something about it on Facebook, so that must have planted the seed in my mind.
Yeah. I rarely post on Facebook, but I must have felt that very intensely. And I don't know if I said this while I was posting, and this doesn't happen all the time, but for me, with that movie, tears were streaming down my face because I really got, I think because of the skill of the movie makers, that particular film really transmits psychic pain in a way I've almost never seen in my life. So,
I think that sums it up. Absolutely. Well, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about Sound of Metal down the road. I want to talk about the big moment that has really kind of upended the discussion about this year's Oscars, which was the fact that they chose to do Best Picture a third to last instead of last like normal. And on top of that, the final award of the night, Best Actor, instead of going to the late Chadwick Boseman, which a lot of people expected, it went to Anthony Hopkins, who did not attend the ceremony. So we had one of the most kind of fascinatingly anticlimactic finishes to the show in a while. All we got in the end was just Joaquin Phoenix saying, "The Academy accepts this Oscar on behalf of Anthony Hopkins."
And then bye.
So
out of here.
I want to put it to you guys. First of all, I mean, what do you make of that ending? Is this a snafu for the record books in terms of the Oscars? But also, we should mention Nomadland won Best Picture. Do you think that that was a worthy choice? And let's start with you, Geoff.
So I just watched Nomadland on Saturday, and I guess I'm still digesting it in some ways. I can understand why the Academy picked it. I think it has more of a, not social justice, because I don't want that term to sound pejorative, but there's a certain social issue, income inequality, or that runs throughout the film that I think appealed to Academy voters. I guess I'll just say I'm disappointed that it won, but I'm not. I don't feel like I was robbed or stabbed or something. I also haven't seen all the nominees.
I think. Am I right in assuming that none of us here have seen The Father?
Wrong. I did see it.
You did see The Father.
Yeah, but I don't want to interrupt.
Jeff, speaking of which, what do you make of Hopkins's win? I mean, it's funny to think that the ceremony could have ended with Frances McDormand howling like a wolf, which would have been a fun way to go out on, and instead it ended with a guy who wasn't there and a guy people didn't expect to win. What's your reaction to that?
I was actually in the middle of making dinner. I was making a quiche, and I was trying to juggle the different elements, like frying the bacon and whisking the eggs, and so my attention was a little divided, and I fully expected that the end of the award ceremony was going to snatch me back into, its clutches, its rapturous clutches, and it really didn't. It definitely seemed like it went out on a dull note, not the least of which was Joaquin Phoenix being, I don't know, whatever, Joaquin Phoenix cardboard cutout. It just seemed like if they were betting on Chadwick Boseman winning, it seems like a pretty big gamble and kind of a strange one.
Yeah, I think that's true. Jim, since you're the one of us who saw the father, I mean, maybe you can tell us how you feel about Hopkins winning, and also Nomadland. Are you happy it took the top prize?
No, I agree with Geoff about that. I don't even really, in my mind, classify it as a traditional movie. I think it's a docudrama. They actually used, many of the performers are people who have lived that life, which is a nomad life where one lives in one's vehicle all year round. And the social issue involved there is that there are a lot of older white people around retirement age who just don't have the money to pay rent. So they go on the road, and it's a tragedy. The whole purpose of that film is to bring that to light. And I agree, it's a profound issue that should be discussed, but whether that made it a great film, whether that was a work of art when one is not even working with professional actors. And by the way, Chloe Zhao, the director who won for that film, I mean, she really scored big last night, did a previous film called The Writer with non-professional actors. I mean, they were effectively playing themselves in the movie The Writer, and she did wonderfully. And that's also true of Nomadland, but damn, it's not what I would consider an immersive, powerful work of art where the best of the acting community give their all. It was disappointing to me for that reason. And by contrast, there's no, look, I think The Father is very hard to watch because it is extraordinarily painful watching an individual disintegrate through what, an hour and 45 minutes, maybe it's 2 hours. And man, one innovation, Florian Zeller, who wrote it, and he wrote the stage play originally, one of his innovations was to mess with the audience big time by changing actors for the same role in the movie, trying to confuse the viewer in the same way that the man with Alzheimer's is suffering. To me, I don't know if that worked particularly well because, after all, a camera is pretty objective, so you don't get the subjective craziness of that. It's just confusing in my mind. But there's no question in my mind that Anthony Hopkins is at the absolute top of his game. And yeah, I much rather would have seen Chadwick Boseman win, because boy, did he chew up the scenery in that scene from Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. But I can't really argue with their choice, except that he's an old white man, and Nomadland is white people again. And look, that, I apologize because that starts sounding like a bias, and I guess it really is. But I thought last night we might see a substantial uptick in the acceptance of Black performers also at the top of their game. And there were many to choose from. And again, we'll have to wait a few more years, I suppose, before that happens.
Well, I mean, I want to speak to a lot of what both of you said, and I think what you're getting at, Jim, is that despite the the efforts to invite a more diverse group into the Academy in recent years, old habits die hard. And with McDormand and Hopkins winning, we saw them go for performers who they've honored before. We essentially, I think, saw the Academy kind of retreating into their comfort zone, which is a shame, obviously. And then just kind of getting into what you guys said about Nomadland, and Jim, I'm really glad you brought up the writer, because I mean that was an absolutely extraordinary film, and that was an instance of non-professional actors being so real and so true. I mean, you just watch it and you really feel like they're revealing something of themselves. It's not about transformation. It's not about quote unquote acting. It's just about honesty, and that was very powerful. And I guess the reason I'm perhaps also a little bit disappointed by Nomadland's win, excuse me, is that with this film, with Nomadland, we saw her try to take the same tactic, except she was combining these real people with two movie stars, Frances McDormand and David Strathairn. And to me, as talented as McDormand and Strathairn are, I think the combination felt very uneasy. And while I recognize that Nomadland might not have gotten made without McDormand's participation, I kind of think it would have been a better film if it had been all non-professional actors. And I feel like then we would have seen something really extraordinary, rather than, what to my mind was a series of some very, powerful, honest, raw scenes. And then, you keep throwing in these kind of mythic shots of Frances McDormand alone in desolate landscape. It feels so just intensely movie-ish and kind of Hollywoodized, at least from my point of view.
I think they probably had their minds blown that she said yes to this, and they moved heaven and earth to make sure that they kept her in that movie, because I mean, it was the road to great success for that film, and I agree with you completely that the balance was off. The center had been somehow eroded there, and it was a star vehicle. I mean, David Strathairn is a fine actor, but he is not that status. Good God, this is the third Academy Award for Frances McDormand.
Fourth on top of that with the Best Picture.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Take that, Meryl Streep.
Yeah. Ouch. Geoff goes for the jugular. Well, I want to put the question to you guys. We've talked about Best Picture. We've talked about Best Actor. Let's go down the list, and I invite both of you guys to bring up any categories you want, and including the craft categories that most people don't care about, but that nerds like us, I think, obsess over and enjoy very much. Any, like wins that you want to bring up that you were particularly moved by, or losses that you found particularly irritating. What for you were? For both of you, were some of the standout outcomes of the night?
Darius Martyr for editing The Sound of Metal, and unfortunately, I did not write down, and I cannot tell you the name of the sound editor. I guess
we should say that the editor was Mikkel G. Nielsen.
Thank you. You've seen the Sound of Metal, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Well,
yeah.
The remarkable power of that. When I read the article in the New York Times about the trouble they took trying to make the soundtrack mimic what happens when a person goes deaf, I thought that was a publicity stunt until I watched the movie. What that film does is make the viewer suffer along with that main character who's losing his ability to make sense of the world through sound. And it is excruciating to watch that happen. There's one scene where he's in a pharmacy getting a prescription, and what you hear while you're watching the pharmacist talk to him is, just the bass line of the sound waves being, somehow blocked. That meant a lot to me. Riz Ahmed he communicated that pain beautifully. I mean, I was with him all the way, the desperation in his eyes. And you could tell that he was a go-to guy who had never had a problem in his life. I mean, after all, he's a heavy metal drummer. And, he's been at the top of his game all his life. He's vital. He's young. And now he cannot hear his girlfriend talking to him in bed. And, it all spirals out of control from there. And that's remarkable to me.
I absolutely agree. And in fact, despite the fact that he didn't win the SAG award, I actually was kind of predicting that Riz Ahmed was going to win Best Actor in an upset, because I thought that performance was just such a
yeah. Wouldn't that have been something if he had won?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Been, yeah. Well, Geoff, I mean, I know you are a fan of Sound of Metal. In fact, I ended up deciding to watch it right before the Oscars after you texted me about it. Were you surprised that it got both editing and sound? And are there any other wins that stood out to you?
I was definitely pleased that it won the two awards that it did. It just won the two, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think similar to Jim, I'd seen something about advertising the lengths that the sound editors and designers had gone to replicate the experience of going deaf. I feel like I saw that article well before the movie came out and probably felt like it was a stunt too, but they achieved a really astonishing effect in the movie that I think really, it's utterly vital to the success of the film. If they had messed that up, it would not have been as compelling as it was. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Clean Shaven. I want to say it came out in the late 90s, but the sound design is completely amazing. It's the main character has schizophrenia, and it attempts to replicate the sort of auditory hallucinatory aspects of schizophrenia. And you should just go watch it. But I kind of like Ben. I also was hoping that Riz would have won for his performance. Again, I haven't seen all the nominees, but there was such a, I don't know if I want to say lived in or naturalistic subtlety to his performance. Yeah, it really seemed like if Nomadland won Best Picture, I don't see why Riz couldn't have won Best Actor too. There's something about both of those, like Nomadland the movie and Riz's performance. I guess I'm making a weird comparison here. There was such a sort of subtlety to both that was kind of like anti-Oscar in a way.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
Like, I frankly, I was surprised that Nomadland won, just because it's really such a quiet film that doesn't. It doesn't even really follow like a standard screenplay formula of 5 different parts. There's no real rising action or climax or whatever. Kind of like what Jim said, it's more of a docudrama. And it just made me really puzzled that the Academy of voters would go for that.
Well, see, I want to get into this because I failed to predict that Nomadland would win, and to my shame, in retrospect, I was insisting to anyone who listened that the Trial of the Chicago 7 was going to win, partly because it won the SAG award for Best Ensemble Cast, and that is often a good indicator of what wins Best Picture. We've seen that predict surprises in the past, like Spotlight and Parasite, but also because after I watched Nomadland, I was like, regardless of the artistic quality of the film, it's definitely a downer. And I thought, Trial of the Chicago 7, you have all these, movie stars saying, fun Sorkin dialogue. I thought as serious minded as it is, it's really kind of the closest thing you're going to get to a popcorn picture among these nominees. And so I thought that it would be almost like default escapism for the Academy, and they would go for that. And instead they went for, the kind of downbeat, abstract, experimental movie, which honestly, and you guys can tell me whether or not you feel this way, but I feel like that wouldn't be possible in any other year, because you look at the past few years and in their different ways, I feel like all the recent Best Picture winners have been, even when they were extremely artsy and off the beaten track, they were definitely accessible films. I mean, you have The Shape of Water, almost like a classic primal fairy tale. Green Book obviously is many things, including being horrible, but it's very much like kind of a standard crowd pleaser or pseudo crowd pleaser, I would argue. And then even Parasite, which is, one of the most radical Best Picture winners in history, it's very much a kind of classic Hitchcockian thriller, I think, in a lot of ways. So I feel like in a way the winners were very much dictated by the fact that this was not a normal year, and they did not, had Spielberg's West Side Story come out in December like it was supposed to. I mean, that very well could have been Best Picture, which would have been a much more like kind of standard pick. Although that's a whole separate issue, that movie.
Well, maybe you're onto something about this being a different year, and because of the virus, maybe the voters in the Academy were more sensitized to human pain and suffering. And
yeah, it's interesting. This reminds me of a tweet I saw earlier today where someone said, people are always surprised when Oscar voters vote their conscience and not everyone else's. And I immediately resisted this tweet because I never think Oscar voters vote their conscience. I think you brought up emotion, Jim. I think they vote their emotions. I think on a very, gut level, they vote for what they feel. And sometimes I think that comes from a desire of being frustrated, about, what the consensus or the, popular consensus of the film community is telling them to vote for. I mean, I think, and I'm not saying that always sways them, but I do think that it's interesting how that works in different ways. I think part of the reason Green Book won was the pressure for them to give it to Roma was just so immense, because everyone was, screaming Roma, 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 and, which was the better choice. But I think maybe they kind of rebelled against that a bit. And maybe also they didn't want to give Best Picture to a Netflix film as well, which they have not done to this date. And I don't think that's a coincidence. But I mean, I want to talk about some of the awards that stood out to me. I'm happy to see Daniel Kaluuya win an Oscar because he is absolutely a genius, and I'm sure, as he goes on in his career, he's going to give even greater performances than we've seen just far because he's that good. But also, I just want to, continuing down the Sound of Metal train, I just want to say I'm really happy that Paul Raci got a nomination. And I think this is one of the special things that can happen at the Oscars where someone who nobody's heard of can suddenly be kind of vaulted into the big leagues, and how you can have this guy who's a total outsider, at least in the minds of most moviegoers, who gives just a very understated, true and real performance that has so much empathy and personality. A guy like that with a nomination like this, he can get into the conversation. And now, it's not like everyone has seen Sound of Metal, but now everyone who has knows who Paul Raci is. And I think that's a really cool thing. And I also want to give a shout out to Emerald Fennell, because I've mentioned to you, Jeff, Promising Young Woman one of my favorite films of the year, but I do think it has some flaws, particularly in terms of the editing. There's some kind of frantic cutting to all these different angles that gave me unpleasant Bohemian Rhapsody flashbacks. But one of the things I wouldn't find fault with is the screenplay, which I just think is a really kind of extraordinary poke in the eye. I mean, it's a feminist, revenge thriller with an incredible heroine who I think is I think it's also kind of bold to make her kind of a righteous character who's also an anti-heroine, and whoever you are walking into that movie is gonna make you uncomfortable, and there's something kind of exciting about that. And it's funny, like I hear a lot of conversations these days, like why can't the Oscars nominate fun movies? And to me that's so strange, because I feel like kind of the job of cinema is to challenge us, and I'm glad that the Oscars nominated movies and indeed awarded movies that did that, rather than doing what they often do, which was just give trophies to movies like Green Book that just delight in kind of pandering to their audiences.
The Promising Young Woman, in some sense, at least to me, there's a little Schadenfreude there, such as the first time that Carey Mulligan, playing a drunk and pretending to be drunk, allows a guy into her house, and he thinks that she's about to pass out and he's going to have sex with her. And she starts saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And he ignores her because he thinks she's drunk. And then in beautiful fashion, and this is where her charisma as an actress really shows, she fixes him with her steely gaze and says, "I asked you, what are you doing?" And he realizes that she's not drunk. And suddenly the whole world has changed for this guy. It's beautiful to watch. I've never seen a scene like that. Sure, Fennell, that was her vision, but Carey Mulligan brought it out and made it real. I don't know. There's a delight in that to me.
Well, I want to get into an issue that you brought up the other day, Geoff. We were texting, and you mentioned the fact that we seem to be in an era where movies that win Best Picture just aren't winning that many awards. I mean, often it's 3. The highest we've seen in the last 10 years is 4. My God, Spotlight, Best Picture winner 2015, that only won 2 Oscars. And there's been a lot of talk about the Academy being sort of like alienated from the general audiences and kind of going down its own rabbit hole. I mean maybe Geoff, if you could talk a bit more about this issue and why it's interesting, and maybe address the idea of are we missing something by not having a Titanic or a Return of the King that not only wins all these awards across the board, but also kind of brings both casual and not so casual moviegoers, into the same tent.
Yeah, that's a big can of worms, spanning a lot of the Academy's history. I think a couple of years ago, my partner and I decided that we would try to watch all of the Oscar nominees going backward in time, and then cut that down to just like the Best Picture and Best Acting nominees, and eventually gave up on that because there were a bunch of films we didn't want to watch. You do see, as you go back in time, trends, yes, but more like what you were saying, like you see the Titanics, and even farther back, like Ben-Hur. It really makes you wonder if there was just more consensus about those films being, so superlative, there's that word again, if they really were transcending and surpassing the quality of all the other nominees of the year, or if there's just more I don't know, homogeneity in Academy thinking. I don't know how much Academy voters pay attention to, like you said, film journalism, because there are far more voices out there now to offer far more opinions. It genuinely puzzles me, I guess, that we even could have had movies that would just win all the Oscars. I don't know. You look at, say, films from the last 5 years, and I wouldn't really argue that there's any one film that should have won like 10 Oscars. Maybe Parasite, but like you look at 1917, and it certainly should have won, best cinematography, but I don't know that it really would have deserved, say, best screenplay. I don't know if we're all just becoming experts in the things that we like and the things that we know. I guess I can't I can't really provide an answer to this without just making it a very holistic discussion about where we are as a culture in general and how hyper-mediated we are and how we all have so many more influences than we used to. Again, the black box of who are the Academy voters and, what are their lives like and how do they think about film and how have the social politics of the last 10 years changed, how they think about film.
Same organization gave Best Picture to Moonlight and Parasite, as gave Best Picture to Green Book. I mean, is there like kind of a clash of taste that we're seeing here as it, as the organization grows and evolves?
I think if you consider Mank, did you guys see Mank?
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't.
Well, that to me seems like such a static movie. I mean, it's almost like a snapshot, like one photograph of the industry. It's loving, it's well done, but it seems dead on arrival. Lovingly done. I mean, it won best set direction, and it should have, because scene to scene, it does look like the heyday of the film industry with Louis B. Mayer and the stars of the time. I mean, it's retro in the sense of looking back and loving something about the past, just from the very opening scene where the titles come up and they look like something out of the 1950s, the way the words are slanted across the screen. There's a huge landscape with a broad, cloudy sky, and the music wells up, and it does look like Ben-Hur or some other movie where just the idea that you're in a theater, that the film is going to be good. It's going to be great. And everything about the music, everything about the production values tells you that it's great, no matter whether or not the actors can actually handle the roles. It was a function of the time, and it was a function of the audience too. I mean, people who wanted to believe in the stars of Hollywood, it seems like. And now those days are gone, in part because different voices got an opportunity to express themselves, and people have more opportunity to choose what it is that really excites them. Watching Charlton Heston in the 1950s doesn't cut it.
In terms of how Hollywood works and what it was and where it's going, we're at a moment of transition, and then there's sometimes where I kind of like wonder if the idea of the mythic movie star is going to die completely, because a lot of those people who have this kind of grand stature, they're either older or middle age. I mean, it's kind of interesting, like how, years down the line, we're still talking about Keanu Reeves and Brad Pitt and Sandra Bullock, who are all very much 90s icons, which kind of suggests that the movie star paradigm is kind of crumbling. But then on the other hand, I mean, we can't predict the future because you look at some of these younger actors, you look at, say, Michael B. Jordan or Emma Stone, who knows how they're going to grow in stature in the coming years. I mean, who's to say that Michael B. Jordan doesn't, like rise to or at least like approach the kind of icon status of a Tom Cruise, for instance, although Tom Cruise is obviously kind of a unique phenomenon in and of himself. We're in this weird state of flux in terms of the film industry, and we were before the pandemic. Obviously, we're there during the pandemic, but I don't know, it's very interesting, and I wanted to kind of return to something you mentioned, Geoff, about it's hard to look at these issues without being having a conversation about the culture at large, and you guys can tell me what you think of this. I mean, the fact that we have like so many kind of niche movies, and we have the Academy kind of really spreading the wealth around and giving awards to so many different movies. I mean, it almost seems like what has happened to television with streaming, where there's so much content that everyone's attention is divided. I mean, it almost seems like we've gotten to that point with movies, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, sometimes I'll watch half a movie, or in fact, I'll watch the whole movie, and I'll think, that's 2 hours I'll never get back again. And I ended up hating that movie, but I watched it because something intrigued me about it. But then when you add it all up at the end, it's pretty crappy, actually. And I think that's a product of the fact that the streaming services need content, and so they get it. There are a number of films that have been promoted on Netflix or on Prime, and they sound kind of great when you read the promotional copy. Somehow, the magic isn't there. The magic isn't there the way it is there in The Sound of Metal. And that's lightning in a bottle. I mean, it might be that under other circumstances, as Geoff was saying about the sound in The Sound of Metal, that if it hadn't been so beautifully put together, it would be one of those movies that I would have thought of as a waste of time. It's partly, I think, chance and that is, by the way, I think one reason why the Oscars are valid. I mean, that is a good venue from which to honor art. I mean, the successful completion of a project that touches the soul in a way.
I want to come back to something you said, Jim, that I really liked, about the Oscars being, a great place to honor art. And I really think that's true. And that's kind of the magic that keeps me coming back each year, no matter how cranky I get. I mean, for movie people, let's call it what it is. This is Christmas, no matter how terrible the ceremony is, the year is kind of built around it. This is the climactic thing where, we all kind of get to take stock of, the year in movies that we've been through. And that experience, I think, is always meaningful to a certain degree. But, more than ever, and I mentioned this earlier, and I maybe I'm beating a dead horse bringing it up again, but it's something that, I don't know, I can't stop thinking about. There's so much criticism lately of the Oscars. And again, this pressure that a lot of people seem to think that they should, be choosing more quote unquote fun movies, movies that offer some escapism, movies that I guess are more populist. And I'm not going to say I don't have some, sympathy for elements of that desire, because I mean, yes, I would have loved it if Mad Max Fury Road had won Best Picture. You know, when I was a teenager, I would have loved it if Spider-Man 2 had been nominated for Best Picture. I still think, you know, Spider-Man 2 is better than $1 Million Baby and the Aviator, but that's a whole nother tangent. But I mean, I want to put the question to both of you. I mean, do you find any merit to this kind of conversation, or do you ever feel frustrated by it? Because I mean, we've been talking about The Sound of Metal. That is not an easy film to watch. It's a very rewarding film to watch, but it you know, it kind of takes you on a journey to emotional hell and back. And isn't that experience just as valuable as, you know, something that gives you, you know, 2 hours of escape?
That kind of taps into their failed attempt, if you can call it that, to what was the Oscar that they wanted to have?
Oh, the Best Popular Film Oscar.
Yeah.
Oh, really? That's not a bad idea. Wow.
That was something else, man.
I just feel like that is more political than they need to be, or political in a different way. As for branching out, I don't. What would that look like, do you think? Just to give me an idea.
I guess for me, and keep in mind that this whole question is definitely something I have a lot of ambivalence about. But for me, I guess like I'm not someone who like thinks that a movie like Avengers Endgame could or should win Best Picture. I mean, if I'm being honest, the thought of even that idea is horrifying to me. But you know, by the same token, you know, it does. I guess it does seem like, and now I'm kind of contradicting some of the other stuff I've said. But then you look at a film like the Dark Knight, and you know that was, you know, a movie that was you know, embraced by a very wide audience, you know, huge box office. But it is, you know, a bold, you know, serious-minded film that challenges people and that was kind of, you know, beloved by movie buffs as well. And it's not the only film like that. I mean, there have been more films like that in the years since. I mean, I would argue that both Fury Road and The Revenant in 2015 like had that level of both kind of broad appeal and gravitas. So I guess I feel like if there was a branching out, like, I don't know, I think it would be giving Oscars to movies like that kind of have this popular appeal, but aren't, you know, Mission Impossible, for lack of a better term. You know, not that Mission Impossible doesn't have its, you know,
sure,
merits and achievements for sure.
I don't know. I feel like when the Academy expanded the number of Best Picture nominees, that they were already sort of opening things up to, you know, less than the utmost or most serious films out there. Of course, I don't think any of them have won. I don't know. I don't know that it should really be put upon them to have to lighten up. I guess I'm not really sure overall.
You know, even as frustrated as I can get with the Academy, I resist the idea of like there should be some kind of mandate that they lighten up because, you know, a couple people say so. It's like, you know, I mean, at certain times we may love them, we may hate them, we may be indifferent to them, but I don't know. In a way, it's like, thank God they're this weird organization that can do whatever the heck they want. I mean, we all seem to be in agreement on that Nomadland would not be our choice for Best Picture. I mean, for my part, I would have much preferred Minery to win instead of Nomadland.
Yes, I agree with that totally.
Yeah, I'll third that.
What I was struck with last night, and of course, the production was really stripped down. They didn't show clips of movies. They dispensed with a band. Questlove did the music, you know. So it was simpler. But my takeaway at the end of it was that here are people in that room who have reached the pinnacle of success, and it's deserved. That those people who were chosen to be honored have, through their own ability to focus in their own talent and skill, and sure, there's luck involved, they are being celebrated for doing something that I haven't done, you know? And I really liked that. It seemed like it's essential that they be honored because maybe for just the simple reason that there might be an 11-year-old out there who is inspired to become great, like they've become great. And I'm glad it's there.
I think that's well said. And moving away from the Oscars and getting into some of our own favorite films, as anyone who's on this planet knows, we had a very strange year, and that, to say the least, that disrupted the rhythms of everything, including T.H.O. movie reviews. So sadly, we did not do an official best of the year podcast like we normally do. So I wanted to give you guys this chance. Maybe if you could just briefly talk about one or two of your favorite films from 2020, and just share with people why you liked them, why they had an impact on you.
I didn't see a ton of 2020 movies. Something about the pandemic just kind of changed how I was watching things, I guess. But one that did kind of linger with me was Vast of Night. It's indie film with a very small budget, no known actors or anything like that, shot in Texas, I think. It's set in the 1950s and has a lot to do with UFO alien sightings. But it does a lot of really interesting things. Like, it has I don't remember how long it was, maybe like 8 or 9 minute unbroken shot with like 14-year-old actress, which was really striking and compelling. And there was also a kind of like a shot sequence in the film that I've never seen in any other movie before, where the film is set in this really small town, and there's one point where somebody's working at a radio station and they're talking about something that's happening at a basketball game at the high school, I think. And the camera goes out of the building and then just drives along the ground through the entire city until it reaches the basketball court. And apparently they achieved that by just walking the camera out of the radio station, putting it on a go-kart that a kid was driving, and had him drive it to the basketball court. That's just a really fantastic and surprising effect, which was kind of how I guess you could sum up the whole movie. Is just didn't have any expectations about it being that interesting, but it really was in the end.
There's a movie that struck me as extraordinarily powerful, and it turns out, I just looked it up, it was released in 2020. It's called Wendy.
Oh,
and Wendy.
Yes, thank you.
A retelling of Peter Pan.
Yes.
Right. You know about it. Go ahead here. Talk about it, man.
Well, it's you brought up a movie that I was going to talk about. In fact, Jim. So there's a little story behind me for Wendy. I'm not sure that it ever even played in a theater in Portland, but that was the last movie that I reviewed for Willamette Week before the pandemic shut everything down. And it was a great one to go out on. It's as you said, it's a retelling of Peter Pan. It's the first film since Beasts of the Southern Wild that Ben Zeitlin has directed. It is such an exhilarating and rapturous and just beautiful experience watching that movie. It's kind of an incredible portrayal of just the agony and the ecstasy of growing up. And I love how he took the kind of basic story of Peter Pan, and yet he stripped it down, yet in a way like made it more magical. Like, I love that there's no flying in this movie. Instead, Wendy, follows Peter Pan onto a freight train, and somehow that
Yeah.
more just riveting and beautiful than the original version. And before this, I was kind of thinking about, God, like, how do I describe that movie? And the thing that kept sticking in my mind is that it's like the Terrence Malick version of Peter Pan. It has that kind of dreamlike, surreal quality. I have to admit, I love Wendy so much. I literally do not understand why a lot of people don't seem to love it. So,
well, did they just not see it? I mean, why wasn't that film under consideration for the Oscars, I wonder? It is one of the most original concepts at deconstructing, making the fantasy of Peter Pan, what we all know from Walt Disney and other producers, making it real, taking that idea seriously. As you say, no flying, because you can't really do that. But in a lot of other ways, what that movie is about could really happen. And they get on, there's a diner by the railroad tracks. And every once in a while, the kids somehow get seduced into getting on one of the boxcars. Then that they don't ever come back because there's a poster. Have you seen this child?
Yep.
So they disappear. And it's like, what happened to them? And God, it's a powerful movie. Damn. I mean, the emotion, the loss of the parents,
Yeah.
is really there. And it's like, oh, you never think of that in Peter Pan. What about those kids leaving home and going to this island? But you take those elements and you put them together as though it's really true. And then it becomes, to my mind, extraordinarily powerful.
I think too, and I want to give a shout out to the actors because, back on Beasts of the Southern Wild, I think Ben Zeitlin had a really extraordinary collaboration with Geoff Wallace, and he had, I think, something very similar with Devin France, who plays Wendy, and Joshua Mack, who plays Peter.
And Peter is great.
He's so great. And I'm someone who's very critical of child actors because I feel like often they have a kind of prepackaged vibe, an artificial cutesiness. And these kids were just so free and so real. It kind of took my breath away. Like there's a scene where on the island in this kind of rundown building, Wendy is pretending to serve everybody gumbo and Dr. Pepper, which she's just imagining is there. And God, like just watching Devin France do that scene, I don't know if it was improvised or what, but it felt like the kinds of like crazy, strange make-believe games that I would have played with my friends when I was that age. And God, it's just a really, transcendent film to watch. And
Good word.
I think, too, I wish that even it had just gotten some nominations in the craft categories, because the cinematography alone is better than anything in Nomadland or Mank. So there's that. But speaking of craft categories, I also want to mention another favorite film of mine from 2020 because it won Best Visual Effects at the Oscars this year, and that's of course Christopher Nolan's Tenet, which for me was being a big Nolan fan, waiting to see that film on DVD because I was not going to venture into a theater with things being the way they are. It was a very long and painful wait. So the day that DVD came in the mail, I tried to make it a party. I put on my best Nolan style suit. It's certainly not a perfect film. It's not a thunderous masterpiece like Dunkirk or Interstellar, but it's a great popcorn film with just a really lovely brain-teasing, fun storyline, terrific performances by John David Washington and Robert Pattinson, some really just delightfully bonkers action. And And a way I feel like it's kind of a spiritual sequel to Dunkirk, because it's also a film about soldiers who fight for what's right, not because of any inner demons or, kind of personal story. They save the world, simply because they're following their moral code, and they don't give in the face of the apocalypse. And it was an inspiring movie on that level, aside from the just pure cinematic pleasure it offered, which obviously was considerable as well. Well, any final thoughts before we wrap up, you guys?
I don't know. I've been contemplating something that you said earlier, Ben, about streaming services and divided attention, and the concept of the older concept of the movie star, like that Brad Pitt and Keanu Reeves embody, versus what we have now. I guess just off the top of my head, it seems like there's sort of positive feedback loop or some kind of self-reinforcing mechanism that the streaming services provide now. So as an example, we could look at like Robert Pattinson, and he was his career got started in a gigantic, super successful film series, and that kind of enabled him to do whatever films he wanted. And as luck would have it, there's also a system now through money machines like Netflix and Amazon that provides actors with the opportunity to engage in a lot of more artsy films, right? Whereas classically, Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt wouldn't have had that option necessarily. Like if they would have gone off and done some art house films, that could have tanked their career.
I mean, as someone who loves the movie theater going experience, I've certainly done my rants about Netflix and whatnot. Yeah. But at the same time, I feel like this hunger for content that the streamers have,
exactly,
it does have a lot of benefits for us. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think that until Mank, we went, I believe, 6 years without a new David Fincher film. And then, now we got we got Mank, and now already, another one has been announced. This film, The Killer, that he's doing with Michael Fassbender, that is also going to be a Netflix film because he now has an exclusive deal with him and with them, and that's just like the most like kind of mainstream example. I mean, again, going back to Sound of Metal, the fact that that's an Amazon Prime film. My God, you just blow the doors open the minute you provide that kind of access, which I think was especially valuable during the pandemic. I mean, hey, I was willing to pay $20 to watch Meanery and Promising Young Woman, but there's something exciting about Sound of Metal being on a streamer, and hey, not only can I watch this this brilliant art film, I can watch that twice, 3 times if I want to. Suddenly,
yeah, exactly. It kind of comes out of that generation of like Robert Pattinson, Andrew Garfield, all these fantastic, good-looking, brown-haired actors. When I was in Italy, I think it was 2 years ago, there was at the airport, there was this massive advertisement. It was both for Spider-Man Far From Home and for an Italian fiber internet provider. And there was some pun about, Spider-Man's webs being strong, the service being strong. And on top of all that, Tom Holland was wearing like a designer Italian suit in the ad.
Oh my gosh. Well, I feel like, Geoff, by describing that ad, you just kind of summed up the state of the big Hollywood, for lack of a better term, where you have all these insane mergers and whatnot. And I mean, God, like this just immediately makes me think of the AT&T and Time Warner being one now, and that it's a mad, crazy ride. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. My most optimistic appraisal of the current state of the entertainment industry is that the heaviness of the big budget behemoths sort of gives rise to a second new Hollywood, where we have the 21st century equivalent of, The Graduate or Bonnie and Clyde. But who knows? I hesitate to predict anything at this point.
Well, we missed a couple of movies, and there's nothing we can do about that because there are time constraints. But we didn't really talk about Minari. I'd like to say that movie was very well directed, well performed. It is more or less flat in the sense that it's everyday life, but it is as though the viewer has this privileged access to a family struggling to adapt to American culture, even though in at least one case they don't speak the language at all. And it's beautifully done. And it's a movie that, of course, wasn't going to win because it doesn't really have any of the inherent drama that a lot of them do. But
it was too good.
I just want to acknowledge that movie. I also want to acknowledge an actress in Judas and the Black Messiah who plays Daniel Kaluuya's love interest, Dominique Fishback. Her performance, their connection in that movie is so powerful and believable that they fell in love. And I watched her in a SAG after discussion of that movie, and she talked about how she journaled, how she watched Daniel Kaluuya very closely to figure out how theoretically she could love him. I loved that she went through all these pains in order to achieve something real on film, and she actually did it. I mean, the connection between them is palpable, and it makes that movie rewarding. It's rewarding on any number of levels. Lakeith Stanfield is great in that film. Daniel Kaluuya is great, but so is Dominique Fishback. And that's a movie that I'd recommend it. Anyone that's listening to this, watch.
Well, I think that's well said, and I certainly, I've yet to see Judas and the Black Messiah, but I'm very much looking forward to it. And as far as Minari, I echo the wonderful things both of you guys said about that film, because there is that kind of beautiful ordinariness to it where you can just be watching a father and son standing in a field, and just the way that's presented becomes the most riveting thing in the world. And Brad Pitt's company, Plan B, produced that movie. They're producing Lee Isaac Chung's next film that he's directing, so I have a feeling we're going to be seeing much more of him, and I look forward to that. I think that wraps it up for today. If you like this podcast, please click thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at T.H.O Movie Reviews. And please check out all the great reviews and content we have at thomoviereviews.wordpress.com. I'm your host, Bennett Campbell Ferguson, here with Geoff Wallace and Jim Newman. And from all of us here at T.H.O Movie Reviews, happy movie watching, and happy hopefully watching an Oscars back at the Dolby Theater next year.